My revised edition book contains new information about the famed Braxton County Monster incident. My ongoing 20-year investigation into this case, and the longest in history, reveals a startling truth about an invasion of gigantic extraterrestrial beings that occurred on September 12, 1952. In 1952, America reported a record amount of UFOs to Project Blue Book, the Air Force group in charge of investigating these objects, also called flying saucers. During this Cold War era, the UFOs only complicated matters as President Truman anticipated a nuclear airstrike from the Soviet Union. In July, the UFO sightings peaked as jet fighters continued intercept attempts against the unknown objects. On the consecutive weekends of July 19th and 26th, the situation escalated when numerous UFOs appeared over the Washington area. For several hours, the objects wreaked havoc with Navy and Air Force jets when they flew through the restricted airspaces of the Capitol. These bold actions prompted several jet scrambles and chases, which caused a dilemma within the government, making worldwide headlines. On July 29th, a press conference was held to address the UFO situation.
We've been able to explain them as hoaxes, as erroneously identified friendly aircraft, as meteorological or electronic phenomena, or as light aberrations. However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
Major General Roger Ramey, Deputy Chief of the Air Force Staff for Operations, told the news conference that interceptor planes have raced aloft several hundred times as a result of reported sightings of unidentified objects. He said that was standard procedure. The 80-minute conference was filled with double talk and confusing statements. The Air Force said their Project Blue Book officials had explained away 80% of the sightings. Ultimately, they tried to end the media hype of the saucers and attempted to cover the situation. However, the UFOs refused to go away, and the jet scrambles continued. The government was aware of the UFO problem long before 1952. Their handling of the situation was revealed on July 28th when Air Force spokesman Lieutenant Montz explained the solution. He said the jet pilots are and have been under orders to investigate unidentified objects and to shoot them down if they can't talk them down. The Fall River Herald News reported jet pilots are operating on a 24-hour nationwide alert to chase flying saucers and to shoot them down if they refuse orders to land. The San Francisco Examiner reported jets on 24-hour alert to shoot down saucers. This United Press news article from July 28th stated, the Air Defense Command alerted jet interceptor pilots to take off instantly in pursuit of any flying saucers sighted anywhere in the country. It added, the Air Defense Command's mission is the air defense of the United States, and it is vitally interested in anything unidentified that flies in the air. On July 29th, the president of the American Rocket Society, Robert Farnsworth, sent an urgent telegram to President Truman. In part, he said, I respectfully suggest that no offensive action be taken against the objects reported as unidentified, which have been sighted over our nation. Should they be extraterrestrial, such action might result in the gravest consequences. Now, the special news bulletin. Objects believed to be meteors have soared through the skies in 3 states and Washington, D.C. The display caused many residents in Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio to think they were seeing flying saucers.
Looks like they're running out. Roger, all mark the logo. Just tell me which one you're
On September 12th, 4 damaged UFOs flew over the eastern United States and crash-landed on American soil. 3 of those objects flew in, one after another, over the mid-Atlantic United States, and the 4th flew in from the south. Amazingly, Project Blue Book officials blamed all these sightings on a single fireball meteor. The 3rd damaged object that passed over the mid-Atlantic was called the Flame over Washington. It headed towards Flatwoods, West Virginia, 206 miles away. The flaming object passed over Washington, D.C. at approximately 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on a western heading. The object passed over central West Virginia about 25 minutes later and reached northern Braxton County. The damaged UFO, thought to have been a meteor, then made an amazing turn and actually redirected its flight course heading and proceeded south. Shortly after making a 45-degree angle course change, the object passed south over Burnsville and proceeded to Flatwoods. The damaged object followed the safety of the road below it, then passed over Route 4 and continued to fly south through the valley of the surrounding mountains. The oval-shaped object, about 32 feet long, was engulfed in flames as it flew at a low altitude and struggled to stay airborne over the area. After passing over Burnsville, the damaged object had a 10-mile flight before reaching its final destination, Flatwoods, the geographical center of the state, located about 200 miles west of Washington, D.C. This object, said to be a fireball meteor, was actually a damaged UFO navigating through the mountains of Braxton County, trying to reach a predetermined landing site. It reached Flatwoods at about 7:25 and flew towards the school playground, where several boys were playing football. The craft, engulfed in flames, passed low over the playground, redirected east, and landed on the mountaintop of the nearby farm. Some of the boys yelled it was a meteor, while others yelled it was a flying saucer. Quickly, the boys left the playground in search of the downed object that touched down across the road. Moments later, an eerie silence fell over the vacant school playground as the boys ran up Route 4 towards the Fisher farm on their journey. The object crash-landed on this plateau. Witness Jack Davis saw the object go over Flatwoods and then saw it go down. He told me it didn't resemble a meteor. The object I saw was a craft. It had a brighter illuminated light at the top and was kind of orange-red. It came in behind the trees. I knew it was up there. The light stopped there. It was obvious to see. This is Depot Street, the access road to the Fisher farm. Several of the boys ran up the street towards the farm, while others got scared, departed the group, and went home. The May home seen here is the main entrance to the Fisher farm. The boys ran to the nearby home of Mrs. Kathleen May, mother of two of the boys in the group, Eddie and Freddie May. The boys piled through the front door, causing a commotion, and were yelling about the object they had just seen. Some of the boys said it was a meteor, while others claimed it was a flying saucer. Jean Lemon, an 18-year-old cousin of Mrs. May, can be seen in the back row of this photo to the right. Mrs. May listened to the boys who were anxious to go onto the farm. The two adults then led the group of boys in search of the falling object. Shortly after arriving on the farm, a 12-foot-tall being from the landed craft confronted these innocent people and terrified them. This being became known as the Green Monster, the Flatwoods Monster. My revised edition book contains new information about the famed Braxton County Monster incident, one of the world's biggest news stories of 1952. My ongoing 20-year investigation into this case, and the longest in history, reveals a startling truth about an invasion of gigantic extraterrestrial beings that occurred on September 12, 1952. The book also reveals the cover-up of an Air Force jet fighter that vanished during a UFO wave that night, and exposes the incident with numerous official documents and public records. Through my investigation, I was able to reconstruct and recreate the entire scenario of events that occurred on September 12, 1952. I discovered that 4 damaged UFOs went down in the United States that night, which resulted in 2 aliens being stranded on Earth. Subsequently, there were massive search and rescue missions to retrieve these downed aliens that were witnessed by countless American citizens. They were later told through the press that these numerous alien craft were only meteors. As evidence, I discovered there are no astronomy documents in the world that record any meteor activity that day, only in Project Blue Book.
Back in 1952, when the monster was sighted here in Flatwoods, see, I was 13 years old, going to school in Burnsville. But that evening I was sitting on a bench, and I glanced up, and this ball of fire came right across, heading towards Flatwoods. It was so much lower, is what caught my attention. It was reddish orange and went very fast, but I knew as low as it was, just clearing the treetops, that it was going to land someplace close, somewhere very close in our county.
During my investigation, I interviewed eyewitness Freddie May. Mr. May was one of the boys who saw the flaming object pass over the schoolyard that night.
When we first seen it, we seen the fireball. Somebody, I don't remember who seen it first or anything like that, but somebody said, "Looky there," and we all looked up and we seen this fireball coming from over the mountain here. And it came down and lit on the other side of the mountain, right up there, just over the edge. We could tell it came down up there.
Kind of a metallic smell, and it just looked like it was getting foggy. And I turned and looked around like toward town to see if I could see the street lights. And we got up there, it was making a hissing noise, and it just sounded like it's frying bacon and flipping a silver dollar or something against a piece of canvas, stretched canvas. So we went up the hill and just started around this one little flag, and I saw something, and I turned on my flashlight, and it just lit up like a Christmas tree. And the top of it came up. Now, it didn't have arms. It showed from the drawing, it showed arms, but didn't.
Okay, from where you're filming right there now is where it was, which is the Braxton County Monster. It was the main thing we seen. It's left of the tree right here, and approximately it had a limb that come out over the road. I guess there's a limb right here that was a little better than 12 feet up to that limb. It was standing out none of that limb, so we figured it was about 12 foot tall or in that neighborhood from that there.
Behind me is the remains of the tree where the witnesses saw Flatwoods Monster. It was hiding behind the tree when the witnesses came up from this direction. They passed in front of the tree, and in this direction right here is where it was seen. The monster had moved around to this part of the tree and looked down on the witnesses. This is the actual spot where the whole event took place.
I think it was mechanical. It wasn't alive. Maybe inside the thing, there could have been something, that was alive. But what I seen was either a small spaceship or a suit of some kind that something was wearing. It was mechanical.
In 1996, I interviewed Ailey Stewart Jr. In 1952, Stewart was the co-owner and publisher of the Braxton Democrat newspaper located in Sutton.
My name is Lee Stewart. In 1952, I was co-owner and publisher of the Braxton Democrat in Sutton, West Virginia. I also broke the story on what is now known as the Braxton County Monster, or the Flatwoods Monster, I guess, in modern times. On September the 12th of 1952, I was contacted at my office by the West Virginia State Police, Corporal Ted Tribbett. He told of this incident, and he told me the sheriff was out on call and that he was tied up and could not answer the call immediately. And so I proceeded out to the home of Miss Kathleen May. I was the first person to get to the maze. It was sheer turmoil. Three of the boys that were there were very sick at their stomachs. All of them were wheezing and coughing. Ms. May's eyes were as red as they could be. And sort of weepy. And everybody was talking at once. And so I just sat and listened for a while, and as soon as I realized that the whole thing had taken place on the mountain right behind the house, I started asking if I could get somebody there to direct me to that spot. Of course, the answer was a very emphatic no. After a little coaxing, I convinced the two older boys to go up the mountain, back up with us. And so we left the house. The two older boys, Bill Storch, myself, we were armed. We had a 12-gauge automatic shotgun, a couple handguns, and 2 or 3 local people that lived right around there came by and they went up with us. They also were armed. And on the way up, the boys were hesitating and wanting to go back. And we coaxed them on. In fact, I had my hand up around the back of one of the boys' necks. And under his breath, he was actually crying like a whip pup. We had 2 large flashlights, electric lanterns, and we picked up the skid marks and just spotlighted around because none of us were really inclined to hunt for something we didn't know what was in the dark. So we decided we'd go back. We went down to the maze, back to the house. I went in and talked to the maze concerning maybe I could come up with a tape recorder the next day and interview boys.
A few hours later, the landing site on the Fisher farm in Flatwoods was investigated by another group of armed men. This group, a military group, was the West Virginia National Guard. The commander of the West Virginia National Guard, World War II combat veteran Colonel Dale Levitt, was telephoned at his Braxton County home that night by the United States Air Force in Washington, D.C. Colonel Levitt had 2 specific missions to carry out at the crash site on the Fisher farm. His first task was to cordon off the area to unauthorized entry. His second task was to gather specimen samples from the crash area that the Air Force wanted. Levitt's troops were ordered to stay the night in case something else happened. On one occasion, Colonel Levitt granted me an interview that I videotaped on the Bailey Fisher farm in Flatwoods. This is the only interview of Colonel Levitt in existence. The following segments are from that videotape interview.
They called me on the phone and asked me to get them what they wanted. And I said, well, I'll send it back to you. And I did. I came up here and got it.
What kind of samples did you get?
I pulled up, dug some dirt and all that sort of thing, and we laid leaves off the trees and sent them in. That's all I did.
And this is the tree here.
That's the tree.
Where did you have to send all of this? You sent this to Washington? All of these samples?
The Air Force. That's what they wanted me to do.
And they never told you any of the results?
No results, never. They never do. We had a contingent, and we put a whole bunch of people along, down through here and down below. We probably had about 45 people or something like that. They stayed the night.
They did?
Yeah. To see if something else was going to happen.
In your opinion, what do you think happened here?
Well, there was something here that could fly backwards or wherever they wanted to go. Just anywhere, I think. As long as they don't tear up the equipment. But it was right here. Something was a cover-up. There's something down below, too, but I don't really know what it was.
Shortly after the incident, Mrs. May, witness Eugene Lemon, and reporter Ailey Stewart were invited to New York to appear on a nationwide TV show called We the People. On September 19, 1952, these Braxton County residents were flown to NBC studios in New York to appear on the talk show hosted by Daniel Seymour. Before the show aired, Mrs. May and Gene Lemon sat down with an artist and gave him a description of the 12-foot-tall monster they saw on the farm. This drawing was used for the opening shot of the television show. The artist misinterpreted May and Lemon's description of the 12-foot figure and portrayed it as a claw-waving monster wearing a cloth garment. This incorrect illustration shows a monster wearing a long pleated dress, a tunic top, and a pointed hood, very similar to a monk's robe and outfit. This incident became one of the top stories of the year, but there was a downside to the event. Undercover intelligence men from Washington, posing as writers, went to Flatwoods to investigate the incident. They interviewed witnesses, obtained samples, and put their cover-up in motion. Meanwhile, the press filled the story with inaccuracies and jokes. The monster drawing only made the Flatwoods story more unbelievable. Even when well-known researchers investigated the case, the incident was still incomplete and fragmented. The story had become convoluted, the validity of the incident was questioned, and the truth was lost. The witnesses were ridiculed, and the incident became a mere folklore tale. On September 12, 1952, fighter pilot 2nd Lieutenant John Jones Jr. and radar observer 2nd Lieutenant John Del Curto vanished into thin air during a wave of UFO activity over the United States. This Tyndall Air Force Base fighter jet, being tracked by numerous radar systems, simply disappeared while tower controllers were in voice communication with the pilot. They have never been found. I'm here in Ocala, Florida at the memorial headstone of 2nd Lieutenant John Anderson Jones Jr. John disappeared on September 12, 1952, off the coast of Florida in his F-94 Starfire jet. Here is a photo of 2nd Lieutenant John Anderson Jones Jr. After years of researching this incident, I have revealed a massive conspiracy to hide the stories about this alleged jet fighter accident and another Tyndall jet crash that occurred that day. I also bring to light the Air Force aircraft accident reports that are missing from the September 12, 1952 case files.
I hadn't heard much about the Flatwoods Monster case as I was growing up in ufology. I first got interested in 1958, but it was only when Frank Feschino called me to appear at their 50th anniversary celebration in Flatwoods that I looked a lot more closely to see what do I want to get involved with here. I mean, is this real? Is it not real? Is it just a story? I was very impressed with what I found, so I agreed to go down there. And I was astonished in talking with Frank, and he was sending me material, to see the enormous amount of information he had collected. One of the major contributions Frank Feschino has made to the investigation of the Flatwoods Monster case is to dig out the Blue Book files. Difficult as it was, they were hard to read. But you look at all the witness testimony from that time. You know, people saying it was not a meteor, I have seen a meteor. And there's a whole host of this kind of witness testimony, some very competent, naval aviators, people like that, where the objects were close, and what was seen was clearly not in the category of a meteor. And so we have a lot of testimony the public had never seen. And despite efforts to keep it quiet, Frank has eventually found that material. And it's important to look at that material as sort of collateral background on what was happening here. Frank has found the gold.
The following night, George Snatowski was driving back to his home in New York after a vacation in Ohio. Accompanied by his wife and baby, they took the scenic route through Braxton County. He drove through Frametown when his car suddenly stalled and a sickening odor filled the air. The unsuspecting family had driven into a nightmare. The West Virginia Monster, so called. Actually, the object was a mechanical hovercraft type vehicle that acted as a probe-like device. The Air Force concluded the Flatwoods case was astronomical. The West Virginia monster, so called, actually the object was the well-known Washington area meteor of 12 September, landing near Flatwoods, West Virginia. In January 1953, Air Force spokesman Albert Chopp told UFO researcher Donald Kehoe what intelligence believed to be the basic facts of the Flatwoods Monster case. The group did see two glowing eyes, probably those of a large owl perched on a limb. Underbrush below may have given the impression of a giant figure.
And when you hear about the monster and then the stupid explanation that it was an owl, I mean, a big owl, real big owl, and that the kid's getting sick was because they were frightened. None of that makes any sense.
On August 21st, 1952, Project Blue Book Chief Captain Ruppelt and an assistant were flown to West Palm Beach, Florida to investigate a close encounter incident that made worldwide headlines, only 25 days before the Flatwoods Monster incident. The incident involved Mr. Sonny Desvergers, a 30-year-old World War II Marine veteran and scoutmaster. That night, he was driving 3 scouts home when he saw lights descending into the nearby woods and thought a plane had crashed. He pulled over, left the boys, and went into the woods to look for survivors. 25 days later, Mrs. May led several boys onto the Fisher farm after they saw a large fiery object descend onto the back property of the farm. May and the group walked onto the farm, walked into a wooded area, and headed up a path towards the area where the object landed. Sonny walked deeper into the woods with his flashlight, noticed a pungent odor, and felt an intense heat above him. He aimed his flashlight upwards and suddenly saw something above his head that was shocking. The group continued up the path when a nauseating mist filled the air. As May neared an oak tree, she and another boy saw 2 lights near it, located high in the air. They redirected their flashlights and were terrified at the sight before them, as heat radiated the area. The scoutmaster saw a 30-foot wide flying saucer over his head that was silently whirling only inches over the pine trees near a clearing. Shocked, he backed away from under the saucer's edge, saw a dome shape on top of the craft, and saw beings. Then, a ball of fire quickly floated down at Desvergers' head, but hit his arms, which shielded his face. May and the boys saw a 12-foot-tall metallic figure that lit up the entire area. Beams of light projected from its porthole eyes as it floated towards them and emitted a noxious gas from its lower torso. The giant hovered across the path in front of Mrs. May and sprayed an oily substance on her. The Air Force openly investigated the Scoutmaster incident and obtained many great samples from the site, yet the case was still discredited by intelligence. They wrote off the incident as a hoax. The Flatwoods incident was not openly investigated by the Air Force. Unlike the Desvergers case, intelligence worked covertly in an attempt to down the story and likewise obtain great samples, only to deem the case astronomical. These close encounter cases have been shrouded in controversy for 60 years. This book now reveals an official government document that proves these 2 cases, each involving a flying object, were taken more seriously than the Air Force had led the public to believe. Learn how these 2 terrifying incidents were actually connected, and you will discover that they both actually happened.